What's up? Today we are doing a slightly different video, okay? We're actually going to be looking at drums, if you hadn't already guessed from the incredibly obvious title. What I found when I started writing music was that the drums were an incredibly important part that was apparently easily overlooked. Right now, I am not a drummer, but what I was able to do and the skills that I was able to build in writing for drums were very, very useful. And what I plan to do in this video is just show you some examples of what you can do and a few little things to look out for when making your own drum parts. And you'll be able to see what kind of crappy drums sound like, plus a few tips how to make those crappy drums decent drums. And then I'm going to show you a mastered track of mine that hasn't been released yet. I'm going to show you this riff just standalone, the riff in the demo when I originally wrote it, and then the riff as well with the final mastered track with an actual drummer playing. So my goal is to provide you with a whole bunch of simple tricks you can use to make your drums suit the music and create a better sound that way. So I'm going to show you these examples in Ableton, but they will work the same in anything that you use, doesn't matter which drum program, whatever. So let's jump over to that. All right, so first example, we're just going to hear this riff out. You get an idea, it's a very basic riff. So even though I've got everything named terribly there, there's the guitars, I've got two of the guitars playing the same thing, got a bass, and then of course I've got the drum kit up here. This first thing we're going to hear is the drums just playing a very, very basic riff. Okay, so you see how that sounded, it gave it a lot more vibe. It took it from a crap riff to a riff that's got kind of bitter rock to it. Now what I've done is match the drums to the riff. Give that a listen. You see, like I just added in some things. It turns out that a very basic riff did most of the work that you needed for that. So this is one of the other points, is don't make things too complicated, right? But the most important thing was to do a basic fill that led into the next section, okay? And that's pretty much it, is once you've got a groove, then just lead into the next section. Just doing that on the last few beats of the bar will bring everything up a massive amount. Highly recommend doing this. I do it pretty much all the time. And the more creative you can get with your fills, the more interesting it's going to sound. And start getting compliments from drummers, which is always a weird thing. All right, on to the next example. Totally different riff. Pretty metal riff. It's just once again a basic drum beat. All right, and now with the drums accenting everything. All right, so you see, once again, straight away, we've got something that became really interesting because I changed the drums up to suit the second part of the riff where it starts doing the different things. But once again, it's all part of what you need to do. So you need to figure out what are the required parts, what sounds best for the specific parts that you're doing, and then follow that up. Later on, I will show you a few things that you can do if you do not know where to start with drumming. But this video is about demonstrating what is really important to do. So just follow the groove with what you need it to be. All right, we've got the next one coming in. This one is a lot softer, but to see that the same principles still apply. standard basic beat, this is what it sounds like. All right, and the next one, we've got kind of two different sections. So like, I guess a bit of an intro into a verse or something. But once again, nothing is changing except for the drums. So just by these tiny adjustments, you create movement in your music. Right now, of course, if you can get a drummer to do this stuff, you're going to get much better results than you are if you're me. I really hope that this is outlining to you what the value of knowing how to do this stuff is, because if you can come to a drummer and say, I want something like this, and then they make something out of that, then you're getting the result you want and you're giving the drummer a chance to actually write for you. If you don't show them anything, they could come up with something that totally makes your riff, but there's an equal chance that they're going to make something that actually ruins it, because they don't know what you're after. They don't know the mood that you're going for. They don't know the vibe that you want. So it's really important for you to be able to do this, because it just allows you to communicate. And the more that you do this, the better you're going to be able to communicate with your drummer so that he or she feels understood when they're doing it. Next, I'm going to show you a riff of mine. This is an incredibly basic riff. There is 3-4 chords used in the whole thing. You will see how powerful drums can make it in 2 different ways, and I'll explain them as they come up. But first, here is the riff. Okay, so I told you it's basic, literally 4 chords. Next one, this is straight from my demo, which is what I was looking for. I can't find it, it's down here. So this has some 4-year-old me singing on it, not when I was 4, but from 4 years ago. It has some very poor mixing, and the problem with it, it has way too much stuff going on with the drums. You'll hear how that's improved by an actual drummer straight after. Told you it was bad singing, told you it was way too much drums, right? But it still sounds better like that than it does the riff on its own, right? That itself sounds better than if it was just a straight boom, ta, boom, ta. However, when we hired an actual drummer to get in and do an amazing job, the result was this. Of course, this is mixed and mastered, but yeah. We call ourselves mercenaries. Fighting for a land, we train to kill our enemies while we battle on this sand. We call ourselves mercenaries, fighting for a land, we train to kill our enemies while we battle on this sand. So I hope that gave you a little insight into how much just a little bit of drum work can totally change the sound of your track. Now there's a few things to keep in mind, and I am not a drummer, so all of the stuff that I do and anything that anyone likes is simply because I'm practiced at it, right? It's simply because I roughly know what I'm doing, I roughly know the sound that I want, and I go for that. Every single time I've given my stuff to drummers, it has come out sounding better, and so it should. They do that for a living. All I do is write and play guitar. I just fumble around on drums and try and make a good sound. Things to keep in mind when you are making a drum beat. There are a few ways to do it. One, you can set up a drum beat and write a riff to that. That is a really, really good practice. Another is you can write a riff and then set your drums to it. Now, I do recommend at first just setting the most basic drums, right? When you're more comfortable or when you start getting bored with that, then start complicating your drums. Play with putting in extra kicks or taking out other snares, this type of thing. Just change it up on the grid and just make sure that the rhythms line up. If your riff is in triplets, so you got a da 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 da, make sure that the drums are in that same grid. Because if your drums are trying to do da 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 when your riff is going da 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 da, you're gonna have a lot of trouble putting it together. So just make sure that they're lined up. That's the very first step. Second step, every transition, you want to roll out of the previous section and crash a cymbal into the next section. So it's usually like a big crash on the one with a kick. Normally, unless you're in an odd time signature or there's heavy accenting that's needed elsewhere, you want to just do a kick on 1 and 3, or 1, 2, 3, and 4, and a snare on 2 and 4. And you keep that, so that just gets the boom, ka, boom, ka. The hi-hats either go with the kick and the snare twice as much as the kick and snare, or 4 times as much as the kick and snare. Now this is one where you can start having a lot of fun. What I would recommend, just for something to play with, is if you have the hi-hats going on all 16th notes, so like a boom, ka, boom, ka. Play around with it, just take out some random hi-hats and see what happens. So you may end up with like boom, ka, boom, ka. Just play around with it and you might end up with something that you find interesting, and keep playing, keep playing, keep playing. What I do recommend as well is when you start getting bored, every single time that you're like, oh, I'm not really feeling this, or this isn't interesting, or whatever, at that point, start looking to change things around. Because if you're only following the simple boom, ka, groove, you're gonna need something more interesting soon enough, right? And as soon as you desire to get more, that's when you start looking at boom, ka, right? And straight away, that's a totally different vibe that is not going to work so well for some riffs. It's going to work fantastically for other riffs. After a while, you start intuiting these things and you will start accenting the riffs in the right way as a drummer would. And that's pretty much it. You just do need to play around with it until you find something that you find comfortable, until you find something that you find useful. With that in mind, that is me for this week. If you learned something, like, share, comment, subscribe, do all the good YouTuber things, and I shall see you next week with some more stuff. Catch ya!